The rapid expansion of early Arab influence, the Crusades, the capture and recapture of cities and territory, and the enormous strife caused by the conflict between Islam and Christianity are all being played out again in modern-day Africa. Take Nigeria, for instance. Quote, Nigeria, evenly distributed between Christians and Muslims, is a country where people identify themselves by their religion first and as Nigerians second. Around 20,000 have been killed in God's name since 1990. I think that might be an undercount, but anyway. This is one of the many religious battlefields in this part of Africa. Evangelical Christians, backed by American collection plate money, are surging northwards, clashing with Islamic fundamentalists, backed by Saudi petrodollars surging southwards. And that is a direct quote, that last quote is a direct quote of The Economist, a special report on religion and public life, 2007. That's all valid. In fact, there's a lot of interesting things going on in here that is worth pointing out. Now, to be fair, obviously, this is a much smaller scale conflict than the Crusades, but it's the same concept, right? And you're right about the money. Not just evangelical Christians, like you said, American money is funding these Christian war. People are not aware of how much evil is being perpetrated in Africa at the hands of American Christian evangelical authorities and funds. So like the mass gay killing law in Uganda, the outlawing, executing gay people, that law was lobbied for in Uganda by American Christian evangelists who failed to get that law passed in the US. They had hundreds of thousands of American voters ready to support kill the gays legislation. But hundreds of thousands is not enough in America. So they had to go to Uganda and got it done there. So in Nigeria, yeah, the same thing's happening. Like you've got this religious war basically going on, funded by American evangelicals. People don't know about this. I think it's important to call attention to it. The only thing I would add here is that it's the Christians and the Muslims are evenly balanced with each other, but there's actually a third faction in Nigeria that people forget, which is the traditionalists, who are pagans, basically. They reject both Christianity and Islam and still follow the native tradition Nigerian. And there's a lot of Nigerian nationalism driven by the paganism because they hate the Muslims and the Christians. They think we should be following our religion, the fucking Nigerian religion. And so you've got a third faction involved in this conflict, which is kind of accurate to, if you go back to like the 4th or 5th century, before you had Islam dominating the conversation, it was Christians against pagans. But yeah, you've got pagans as well in Nigeria involved, but they're less involved in the violence. The most violent people in Nigeria are the Christians and the Muslims. So that's definitely the case. And there's been a rising effort to push secular nationalism in Nigeria as a response to this. It hasn't succeeded. But the idea of Nigerian nationalism, the idea of taking the idea that we should be Nigerians first, religion second, this has been an idea that's been pushed by Nigerians for a while. Like I said, it hasn't caught on, but it's been a thing that they've wanted to realize. And I wrote an article. One of the major proponents of this is Tai Solarin, who's probably one of the most famous atheists in African history. I have a whole article on him, Tai Solarin. He was a socialist, atheist, humanist. And he very much wrote articles pushing this idea that we should be Nigerians first and put religions aside as a secondary identity. And people didn't listen to him. But anyway, there's a lot of people who do support that idea in Nigeria. And this idea of Nigerian nationalism gets reflected in modern fiction. So there's an author now who's doing a sci-fi series, the Rosewater trilogy, a Nigerian author about Nigerian future nationalism in Nigeria, with high-tech Nigeria as a world power, is interesting. So if people want to like see that ideology played out in fiction, or the idea anyway, although the author of that depicts Nigerian nationalism as just as fraught with problems as American nationalism, but it's interesting that you're right about this, that there's this conflict going on in Nigeria, and a lot of people don't know about it.
Not the Great Awakening. The Enlightenment era was not based on nationalism. It was based on just it was based on the love of thinking, basically. I think any type of nationalism.
It was anti-nationalist, right? It was anti-nationalist, right?
Yes, exactly.
It was an international movement. And the United States was born out of this.
Exactly.
The intention of which was to not be nationalists anymore, but just be a secular democracy. But with McCarthyism and the Civil War and then McCarthyism and where we are, where nationalism still is a freaking problem. But yeah, you're right. The Enlightenment was originally built on the idea of nationalism is just as bad as religious craziness.
Yeah, so secularists can fall into the same pitfalls if they go the wrong direction.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Do you have more to say on that one?
No, I think that was good. And it was good for you
Okay.
to point that out, too, at the end there. So I think that's a good add.
According to the majority of biblical scholars and archaeologists, the ancient Israelites worshipped the same gods as the Canaanites at one time. Yahweh was just one god in a large pantheon of deities, including his father El, his mother Asherah, and his brothers Baal, god of storms and fertility, and Moloch, god of human sacrifice. Sometime between 950 BCE and 850 BCE, polytheism became less fashionable, and the Israelites abandoned all their gods except Yahweh, the former Canaanite god of war. I was quite surprised when I first read this. I had not heard it before. The Christian view is that Abraham worshipped only Yahweh, never any other gods. The other gods were the gods of the neighboring nations. Of course, Adam and Eve would worship Yahweh as they personally knew him. They would pass the word down, and of course Noah would also worship Yahweh as he also is supposed to have known him personally. But the Bible doesn't indicate how worship of other gods came about. Likely it's supposed to have started after the Tower of Babel, when people no longer spoke the same language and broke into separate people groups, and at some point they must have started worshiping different gods. But where the idea of these gods came from is never explained. Genesis 11 lists the descendants of Shem, sons of Noah and Abraham, or Abram as he was called at birth, and Abram is listed in the 9th generation. The genealogy gives the age of the father at each birth, putting Abraham's birth at 262 years after the flood. If Answers in Genesis is right about the date of the flood and the date of the Tower of Babel, that puts Abraham's birth at 2086 BCE. Abraham had Isaac at 100, and Isaac was 60 when Jacob was born, and Jacob was 84 when he married Rachel. The first mention I can find in the Bible of any other god is in Genesis 31:19, when Rachel stole her father's household gods when she and Jacob were preparing to flee. The reference to the gods is so casual that one is led to think that having household gods is a common thing. I went through all the calculations on the numbers of years to show that from the Tower of Babel, 100 years after the flood, to when Laban having household gods was a common thing is only 406 years later. And while this is a long time, goodness, look at the difference between life now and life 400 years ago. But with everyone waiting until they're 60 to 100 to even have offspring, it's only 7 generations from Peleg, who would have been the patriarch at the time of Babel, to Jacob. In just 7 generations, Abraham's descendants had household gods. The whole reason Jacob was sent to Laban to find a wife was so that he would marry within their tribe. Laban is clearly a descendant of Abraham, and he is clearly a polytheist. Nowhere does it mention God getting upset that they had other gods, only that Rachel stole the gods. Yahweh doesn't become demanding that the Hebrews worship only him until Moses comes along, 400 years later. I frequently get Christians saying that the reason that God is justified in killing everyone at the flood is that they were sacrificing babies to Moloch. Actually, Moloch isn't even mentioned in the Bible until about a millennia later. In researching this, I listened to Dr. Josh and Megan with Dr. Francesca Stavrakopoulou. I'm sorry, Francesca, I am not sure how to pronounce your name. 9 months ago. A link to that video is in the description. On Israel's real religion. It's far more evidence-based than the Bible, and I highly recommend it.
Here we go, Carl. Another quiz for you. You know Judas, right? He's the one that sold Jesus out. Okay. So
Yeah.
how did he die? A, he was hanged upside down. B, he hanged himself. C, he threw himself down a hill and his intestines ruptured, or any combination of those three.
There is a series on HBO called 30 Coins about, getting the 30 coins that they gave Judas. And in the opening of that, it shows Judas hanging himself. So that's as close as I can get to any idea of how it happened. Or he got shot in the back jumping out of a second story jail cell. We don't know.
See, no one knows what you're talking about, because although we just talked about that, that's going to appear in a different video.
Okay.
He did hang himself, but in another part of the Bible, he threw himself down a hill and ruptured his intestines. His intestines spilled out everywhere, and that's how he died. So now Christians try to square that circle by saying, well, he hanged himself, the rope broke and it was on a hill, and then after he hanged himself, he rolled down the hill so they try to compile both stories into the same story just to make it fit, and it doesn't. And it's just so obvious, and people just can't understand that blatant contradictions in the Bible like this one, and they still won't believe it. So there's no reaching some people.
I could never, end my life in that way because it would be redundant. I mean, I'm already hung. So.
The liberal atheist comic, ladies and gentlemen.
But seriously.
The oldest copy of the New Testament is the Codex Sinaiticus. It was written around 350 CE, over 3 centuries after the death of Jesus. There are more than 14,800 differences between this Bible and today's standard King James Version. Just how much proof do you need that the Word of God is nothing but the words of men?
Once again, more evidence that this is just the words of men, and from what I think, how they were trying to rule back in the day, how they wanted society to be, which is a big reason why they hate gays and women. It's a lot of that in the Bible too. The Bible's okay with slavery. Sounds a lot like what the men of the Bible who wrote it back in the day liked. I mean, they got off on that type of shit, which is some bullshit. And anybody that tries to make excuses and shit, for that type of shit, usually it affects them in everyday life and how we live today. But they won't admit to it, but you can see it in the way they act. It'll tell on itself, you know what I'm saying? But it's all full of shit.
Even if humans and demons worked together, they could not come up with anything as great as the Quran. And this comes from the Quran, Surah 17, verse 88, and I'll recite the translation to the English from Arabic by Yusuf Ali. So the verse says, "Say, if the whole of mankind and jinns were to gather together to produce the like of this Quran, they could not produce the like thereof, even if they backed up each other with help and support." And that pretty much says it right there. It's pretty explicit. Now, just a note, in sort of the culture of Arabia, and certainly within the sort of Muslim understanding of the supernatural landscape, the jinns are like a separate class of people. So the best approximation, an understanding of them in I guess in English is demons. That's appropriate. They are a separate creation by Allah, where humans were made out of clay, basically dust and clay, as they were in the Hebrew Old Testament. The jinn were made out of fire. So the jinn are supernatural creatures that their essential substance is of fire. And then we also know jinn as genies, right? So as a genie in the lamp, right? So a jinn could get trapped inside of a lamp, and you could make it your master. And this is consistent with other sort of stories like Dr. Faustus, where there's bargains that are made and demons can grant wishes and things like that. Anyway, so it's a very old idea. But what the Quran here is saying that, oh, look at me, I'm so great and wonderful, I'm so perfect and pristine and divine and sacred, etc. There is no way for any configuration of humans and jinn. Yeah, you can create a Great Wall in China. You can create the Burj Khalifa. You can create an international space station, but you could not create anything so wonderful and magical and true and beautiful and delightful and sacred and holy as the Quran. And to that I say, yeah, probably we can. And that's obviously what happens. So the Quran is a purely human work, just as the Bible is, just as the Old Testament is, just as every work of sacred scripture is the work of humans and not the work of anything supernatural. It's kind of funny that it goes to the trouble of sort of anticipating that question. Oh, you guys you put this all together. This is just one man's opinion. Oh, no, this isn't just one man's opinion. This is God's opinion with man speaking it. Well, that's what everybody says. That's what all religions say. That's what Joseph Smith, when he was supposedly writing the Book of Mormon from these plates, it was this sort of divine thing where the angel opened up his eyes for understanding and allowed him to read the reformed Egyptian letters on the golden plates. Right, so Joseph Smith is speaking for God, Muhammad is speaking for God, Jesus is speaking for God, Moses is speaking for God, everyone, the Baha'u'llah is speaking for God. Everyone, is speaking for the gods, right? That's what everybody claims. So is everybody? No. and each individual religion says, well, only I am. I know they aren't, right? Those guys, they're all full of crap, but I'm giving you the true stuff, right? It's easier, frankly, to say, you know what? All of you are making it up. Why should any of these individual prophets have any sort of deference? Why are you special, right? Why aren't why are you better than what Jesus said? Why is Jesus better than what Moses said? And so that also is sort of built into their own ministry, right? Anybody who sets up a ministry, why are you doing that? What's special about you? Why are you going to the trouble of going out there and asking for donations and setting up religious structures that exist? Well, I have to prove that I'm special and unique in some way. So it's God telling me this, right? And God tells me, God let me know that what those other guys said in the past, yeah, that was part of the story, but it's not the whole thing. Well, in 100 years, somebody else will come along and they'll say, yeah, those guys, they were only giving you part of the story. I've got the rest of it from God himself, right? So it's an ongoing thing. And I think we all know this. Even the people that are religious believers, deep down, they know that the standards that they use to disqualify prophets of other religions, they could not apply those to their own, honestly and fairly, because they would have to disqualify their own prophets as well. And they just want to have their own prophets and ignore the rest, and that's really what this all comes down to.